Right.
21.
That's
But the thing that was right was CF versus CY. So I don't know why F didn't. That's the same with the green color.
Do you need pen?
No, we're Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm learning my camera.
Yeah, but I only judge.
I did it last. Then I will take it home. So. That's better. I mean, I don't even know why it would say to do it.
You take it so it doesn't make noise when it clicks.
No.
Right.
Are you going to take those from me then? It really cuts out all of this.
I was about to ask if you jump in when they see them.
We get that a lot, actually.
We can physically jump in.
Like, I think a couple times people like interrupted Nathan's when they see it. They're like, wait, you didn't jump me the speech doc.
No, that's what we do. That's what we do.
Oh, we did that to someone. Yeah.
Wait, where's the speech doc? And they're like, you're holding the. That. We're like, oh man.
Right.
But
Awkward. Let me just make sure everything's in order. Sorry. All right. Just gonna flip right here. Is that cool?
Yep.
All right. Everyone ready?
No.
Yeah.
Oops.
I did that purpose.
Oh, okay.
Same, but he's somewhat official. You have an extra.
We only have 2 timers.
You could, I have a timer on my cell phone.
If they want.
It goes to sleep when it's not counting. You just click the start button and it'll wake up. When it is counting, it's fine.
Okay.
All right. Is everyone ready?
Yep.
All right. 50 just go to the astral space, the torch between human machine neck, flesh, the obsession with the abomination, the narrow space between closed to the side of machines, produce nothing but an age human expansion, lands down to explore, comes out, one shot, down for an expansion, all technology, altering the human ship down, and the expansion returns to the side, cyber space, cyber enterprise, cyber secret, may already be in process of becoming cyber or the NASA itself, the compounding, we're still a human hero, a cyborg is a post-human modified becoming an astral, this cyber that is cyborg was very thin at the tyranny of this red agile environment, all culture that continue, the new alignment, summer, all market brain, got me, punching innovation that's focused on human flesh, stuff, human elements, been on sale, vast project, that's with the element, these biological parts, robotic, and human cooperation separate and these best over technological development, but miniature merger, and this political ethical choice situates itself in a larger narrative of nostalgia, becoming real human. We have never been human, we are always already cyborg, Norquist and human action, the only possible combination of humans, monsters, human volume bodies, or the products of parts of not even making about coming process of many form material chances. They walk with shoes, they driver with an automobile, a person uses a cell phone, becomes something different, never attachments, but she will know what's probably not true, the mindfulness we're capable of, we're thinking, envisioning human beings are using being, limits the environmental connection to be human beings that we have never human to be human, is counting challenge, redefine the infinite relations entities, and this system of valuation discrimination as to what beings count and what do not is a politics of exclusion. This makes real ethics impossible and violence and rather than section of value in the human. We ask you to raise an impossible ethics of infinite hospitality and Trona in 10 the body machines that's been less obvious technical artifacts of themselves in us. And then we have the cyber press of the path. We clearly run trying to drive up as possible to the technology going to roll in previous room. We judge up truth education or things find only if things value and keep it throughout the word form of value is just subject by knowledge being rather be solely as the object we all become a standing reserve of creating value systems and our own self-image is the absolute object of every other should be the all-world opinion we need and that's beyond the possibility of comparison. Hospitality is a culture not something more of ethics. The humans make decisions about the significance of being we often take sentience. It's a criteria for considering significance. We argue it is necessary for the feeling of pain. Why should pain be a criteria for significance? It's because we can feel pain. It's not such a criteria for more worthiness being like those are something how many times to find comments for categories will fail. Like that's what I call there's the human reflection of the face opposite. We can substitute ourselves for the other because we can imagine what it must be like to suffer violence because we suffer violence through empathy. Our egos constitute a single universal community of human intersubjectivity. What about the environment? However deeply we meditate on tables exploring solid waste. And inside yield to the distinct from the acting itself they are, and the to being infinite holy, they are more other than the human other, therefore themselves in the shoes no basis, or excluding the other, has possible holy other one to the other, and to the self with the same the price holy other question that's for lines, real question about self to question the other, and only fights the radical some chapters, hospitality, holy other shadows, overturn the candle, full to carry shut on both in the category, we preach about rifles, principle that follow the cracks where we even feel just like right godliness of the other, refuse to be rendered equal, that's not the relationship of the other, is not the unequal relationship, not become comprehended, but always the relationship, humanity is a whole without radical symmetry, the other can codified calculation comes to becomes possible, don't be the appeal of the other others, we choose build the enemy speak and their sounds, their voices reveal moral judgments, as we dispose them in scrap heaps and garbage cans, our powers and authorities seem firm, they speak as mirrors, revealing to us as consumers, signaling an endless preparation of possibilities, connect our own and identity power, we use them, and then make them hospitality, only having become itself by the voice of the others, that's wrong, our human, hospitality demand, particularly the judgment, inclusion, to survival, our human tendency to treat the inanimate as an instrument needs to be suspended unconditionally, without such that, the possibility of ethical hospitality is not possible, hospitality is not below your time, to think about the alternative decisions, the obvious on the sidewall, death, the public servant, them, side ability to simply be, no, final record, knowing yourselves, let's suppose anything the possible hospitality is the spirit of the sound thrashing of the cup and the destined face of a fellow human being must interrogate our relationship to the other with equal urgency. This does not mean we treat an inanimate object the same as human. There's no same amount of comfort of a body those back the pole holding the side way to spend or parts of read matter we have to live here and now again and again. And the inevitable termination of the universe provides us with an opportunity to embrace ethics. This should be the first impact to evaluate Clark. And Ted, there's no need for ethics, stress, injuries, or check because catastrophes are more concentrated the body that come to be so much of stream of matter energy from which all forms of the body limit touch over the copy, the presence of the form of body goes out to the being or for lost part of death, so takes place for the fate. The false extra beings of termination, the reconfiguration of catastrophe is the start to new life, engagement with soul change, returns of exorbitance of another creation, like Sunet's God against a philosophy that seems necessity of thinking being was wholly irredeemably extinguished. Life is eventually due and promised at a time without knowledge, even the life lens at the significance of place together. We catch up our own motivity infinite 1 trillion years from now. The expansion of the universe will disintegrate the fabric matter itself, terminating the possibility of embodiment. Every star will have burnt out, plunging the cosmos in a state of absolute dark, seen by nothing but husks of black matter. And yet, is that very face of a faceless cosmos, which is ethical being true of that other. Every gift carries the form of a thing which is a gender reception, ranks down, like propelled like sorbent, hinged after my intelligent negates the passivity of generosity, medicine, more culture, rebuke that irresponsibility, primary receptive. You clear that every field discharge us against man's mind, memory, object, and everything, your response to some left. The choose to turn away from bases, as we turn those certain things or choose not to capacity, you facilitate proceeding, turning toward turning away to find equality of knowledge and refusing or engaging with this ethical community denies our personal finitude. This formulates a logic of complete control and immortality that ushers in planetary extinction through mechanization. Geronin in 11 the revealing the abundant being concealed on the particular world sculpture, the concealment of all the earth, even though world sculpture know all unfolding things of what they are, another unfolding things all that they are also go around of sculpture denied to conceal every possible ways of unfolding world sculptures, conceal and exhaustible things earth, they're not rejection of power, capital ordinary, but it's not valid capturing the other much technical opportunities, some of the vulgar solutions and potential commodification is what takes the baseline of gigantic organization things normal sort of even though such engineering might mitigate like consequences of content of the capital molding the solution to the problem of the subjugation of the mechanization. Do not apply the achievement by the driver control organ who can resist the legislation, the recognition of finitude or death, forced to understand is what's completely my contrary to the meaning of being, the nothingness, and next to the opposite of being hunter-mechanization allow for the appearance of finitude to destroy the earth by changing to an inner planet, worth not planet because the planet belongs to gravitational thinking that has a fundamental openness to visible order, the definition of the organic and national law of benefit determination that presupposes the form of collective subjectivity, even not collective finitude signifies a chance on mistake, logical points of honest collection nature, we left them out, not metaphysics sense of dwelling based on finitude of being and dwelling the right from a venue without a sense of physical limitations, and think it's in danger of recruiting ontological violence of balanced measurements, complete control by affording new realms of collective craving for immortality, such violence rage ground for new oppression, nature dominating projects, structured infrastructure control from violent authoritarianism, but also violent cults of power, control, violence, and oppression for the strengthening of the only expansion of the whole world. They're just two sides of the same coin of the manipulative and omnipotent power, captive mechanization, or to fall through there without notion of the failure is possible. But now, whether mankind still has their course of friend called to live with their home, this is the plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase the exploration of space beyond the Earth's mental fear with cyborgs, a radical openness to the cyber results in confrontation with the possible other miscellaneous and Mercury Convention, which is essentially human rights working as space shall not include alternative modification of Homo sapiens without the origin of the human genome is appropriate. Characters Christian separate certain point the universe rover quest to become relevant in post-humans would be a new type of being called entity, would not be human, also not be a machine, post entity. Then his developmental consciousness would be something new, a post-human entity would not be motivated to exist and no guarantee. Moving into space self at the end provides means to pursue mortality. Post-human is not neither Christian launch much of motivation. The reason think post-human entity possesses any affinity for particular perspective, but by human non-magazine migrators and androids, astronauts, and obedient machines for the purpose of the human. That's not by true post-human Christian desire to pursue the interest of human beings, men, and specific vision motivates the goal. It's really impossible. Origin of high compatible culture of performance technology, sports run, in long run maybe less really others care of the vision, but exploration may try to change supplemental. The development of cultural motivation, logic, the work preference, by exactly happen. Again, never know possibility worth consideration. And it is impossible to separate ethics from the actions, policy, otherwise done in the same separate ethics, life with an openness to other beings, such as Trona, and non-ethics, the hybrids supported to desperately no such neutral scripts, and impossible by politics and ethics, supposed neutrality is seen as the way it's less complex and more landscape, the hybrids that prove that weight is a supposition, that politics has to be separated, that's a hybrid mix where there's no simple line between things and beings, and humans between humans and non-human things, that the humans reflect the same each other, become to the possibility as well. Ethically, morality is no more human than technology. Morality is produced the human being, in other words, morality is not a matter of choosing, and cognition is chemistry. Cook, and what is the human mind? Quality, conscious, for low touch, space, the basic neurophysiology, neglect of neurophenomenal segmental phenomena of possible neuros, scholars conscious not ignore the neuromotivation sort of possible material suspension understanding that there is function of the neuron based in addition to create a small brain function, goal explain more mental life contain more computational nature neuron, and recognize so by my previous activity is several mechanisms of neurocognition, positive cognition, rudimentary neurophysiology basic that concerning the solving mechanism that makes neurocentric possible, and openness to others is key to rupture the status quo violence and hinder, and certain 2K individuals are kept trapped by environmental ways of being able to refrain from the round go in their head, the IWC sees to gain power over us, like sharing the limits of you think and live, prospect, etc. Contraction technology provides new ways of affecting and modifying subjectivity, replacing homogenized the vast majority of individual situations with their personality is dwindling, our intentions are rapidly losing all consistency, the quality, relations to others is dull. It is a question of actually one my life for way another for responding to the exents of the political barrier universal forms of reference life is like a performance, moments constructed singularize the best our act, do now repeat themselves, they start over again from fact uncertain with each new attempt, and precisely with their next experimentation, life is a work in progress with no goal in sight, only the trials endeavors do explore new possibilities.
Alright, your Jordan evidence talks about a bunch of things. One of them is the machination of the Earth via things like geoengineering to solve climate change, as well as other things. I'm unclear as to what separates things like outsourcing our space program to things like cyborgs that's able to solve for this machination that your evidence is talking about.
I wouldn't characterize the affirmative as outsourcing.
Okay, regardless.
Okay.
The increased dependence or the use of
So
cyborgs for an explorative venture of space.
I wouldn't even say we do that, but our argument is that the cyborg, because it stands at the periphery between what is seen as value, i.e. the human, and what is commonly seen as of no value, i.e. inanimate objects,
Yeah, I feel
rock
like
stuff.
this seems to talk about
Right, that card
talks
is
about
using.
using.
This card is in the context of finitude towards being, right? It's a criticism of concealment when we say we know like what an object is, what a being is. So we are the criticism of the idea that technology
Right.
only exists as a
Yes,
tool.
no, I
for
understand
us.
that. This seems
But
like
I
a
think the
distinction about the
the
without
distinction
difference.
is a question of the intentionalities with which we approach the two things.
Okay, so what is the
Jordan
difference between the
is not a rejection
intentionalities?
of
No, I have another
technology
question.
as
What is the
such.
difference between
Instead,
the
it's a
intentionalities
question-
of something like cyborgs versus the intentionalities of something like geoengineering to solve warming?
Well, what are you talking about? Like that?
What is the question of?
Yeah, I don't know what your question is, dude. First
The
off.
question is, what is the difference between when we use machines for something like geoengineering to
So,
be able to solve a natural human
your
problem
question-
versus using cyborgs to just strain
First off,
another natural
we
human
don't
problem?
use cyborgs in the same way that geoengineering is used, right? Because that implies that the cyborg, or in the case of geoengineering, that the technology is only important insofar as its material, like, consequences, like what we can do with the technology. Our argument is that those beings have ontological value independent of human observation.
All right, and those
that we should be
beings,
open to.
a cyborg, I guess this is probably a question you get asked a lot. What is a cyborg?
So in the case of a
There's
cyborg
gonna be
is
a
an
very
organic
vague
body.
generic answer that
I know it
calls
will. A cyborg is an organic body polluted with technology.
an organic body polluted with technology, so anything that includes like an organic body polluted with technology is defined as a cyborg, is for the purposes of the one I see.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So for example, like
let's talk
UFOs or
about the ethics claim of the one I see. So how when we deal with the cyborg and other technologies
Or other beings,
otherizations, how
other
does that
things.
spill over to how we deal with things like racism, how we deal with things like poverty, how we deal with things like sexism?
Right. Our argument is that all those forms of exclusions are bad because they presuppose that you can know.
Yeah, no, I understand they're bad. How does your ethics?
Because our ethics are an ethics of openness.
Our ethics is a rejection.
Yeah,
Sure, but why does
of those things
openness
as
in
well.
one instance mean that we necessarily?
Because there is
accept
not one
things
instance,
like-
right? You're right that we have a plan text because there's a resolution that we're trying to be
That's not my
toward.
question. My
Right.
question is how.
Our argument is that we have an ethics of openness, right? In the context of the inanimate, right? Our argument is that the inanimate is a good starting point because it is of commonly the ultimate form of
Okay,
evaluation.
so the
when-
framing statement, just clarification, framing statement of this round. The judge should evaluate the round based off the ethical framing of both the 1NC and the 1NC, and the question is how we access that ethical claim, correct?
Not necessarily, because argument is also based on the intentionality of the 1AC.
Okay.
Right? You have to find that specifically in the 1AC we sought to exclude a particular.
Awesome.
being.
All right, fantastic.
1NC Octos.
Do you need the table here?
Yeah, I can just leave it. Yeah, just make sure it doesn't, that's not just elapsed.
I believe we need the table. Okay.
You got it?
The 1AC over.
You just put it in the, just put it that way.
Here, okay.
How many off? Did you say?
Oh, you guys said?
Yeah.
Not really.
Alright.
What was the order?
3 off, then case.
Yeah, there's 4 sheets. What's it called?
1NC Octos.
Okay, might be a little slow. Sorry. Oh my god. Starts with first off is.
Yes. Everyone good?
Yes. First off is stasis. Our interpretation that is that if the 1AC introduces a plan text, it must be instrumentally defended by the affirmative definitions. A result that expresses an intent to implement the Plan American Heritage Dictionary 2K. To find a solution to involve to bring its conclusion should denotes an expectation of enacting the Plan American Heritage Dictionary 2K used to express expectation of vote negative first negative ground. The 1AC is the point from which 1NC strategy is formed. 2NC is too late to introduce new arguments with sufficient development history. Impacts A is education and depth is best internal to discussion necessary to advance advocacy skills. B is fairness. The African conditionality makes it impossible to be negative competitive equity and independent voting issue. C is predictability needs a stable point from which to formulate negative strategies through the course of the debate that's the biggest internal both education and predictability. Second is stasis necessary to common ground, which is prerequisite to decision making and cooperative deliberation. Turns the case for Z8. A rapid developing change in workplace problems today is found the common ground which cooperate make decision or shifting with new decision making stasis theorized teams agree on the fact meaning of the issue and grasp design determined policy tests. Theory encourages development beyond critical and restorative situation are stasis oriented frameworks necessary to produce the best form of Dell strategy stage of debate, pre-round research, in-round discussion, post-round skill sets and decision making. Z8. We can use stasis theory to develop skills, cooperative decision making, to use stasis to cooperating teaming to deal with many issues as possible to growing more topic, educate themselves towards finding evidence supporting one side of an argument. Students use stasis to collect a wide range of data tasks required by the project stasis to help with glad exposure and empirical work, critical and recurrent scholarships with teaming skills and teaming decision making are essential for students. And next off. The astronauts on the black box of beyond the organizational aging, the USFG betrays managerial insight. The cyborgs far from disrupting the human class into university, turning the case order 98. The position units or agency within managerial can be seen examples of standardization, the arrangement of stability, multiple heterogeneous worlds, foreign theoretical classified predicting to represent metrics from routine black box correspondence packages of production, makes social relation line, skepticism and dissent, civilization, earthmark, extreme action, by extreme violence, multiple collapse, monopoly, cyber, management becomes a unified being reified between inside and outside, terms of being assembled in multi-voice because largely under a formal organization. Despite their intention to focus on techniques of governmentality and the organization of public policy, make war inevitable and ethics impossible. Virgo 7. The strategy of having largely reasoning or knowledge and organs of technology drives to certainty, political maturity, define legitimate strategic reason, then the cost and gets more major aspect of being simply positive precisely the church, shouldn't merely to take over conscious power with technology to govern images, social and political, modern machine, coercive, order the strategy on this from policy, world everything, including humans, that we face an obligation to understand deeply obtaining value calculation on how they have influenced machine political discussion and English about the improved calculation to how does some government interest come to order limited finding me calculable government for standing we may not free to deliver to the express with neutral command humanity counts become no recess with the Andrews looking to take care of the earth that is what segment and being assumed it would debate take place from technology human incorporate command with calculated matter might to be destroyed human bodies supervised by calculating framing reasoning criminal humans who knows within legislative war preparation terrible political leadership mobilize whatever whole slaughter massacres have become vital and the alternative is to reject the disembodied pedagogy of the plan will endorse the rest of the 1AC without calling upon the state a grassroots hacker ethic is necessary to hedge against techno-fascism and governmentality. Garoyan Gaudilius 1. As a cyber pathology, the body and biochemical awareness corporal and studying cyberspace warrants specifically the reflect to return back into the body and the return body would limit opposition dialogue, cyber pure from nature, subject to cyber in the current play. We can look to the metaphor of the hacker program represent vertical grassroots British course things, a lot of biography contents, rich from rich men and man, never to school, hacking is point form of watchdog, counter response to the state, hacking is statute for maintaining cultural resistance, social opposition, knowledge, tech, effective hacking, gives you attention to the cyborg myth, and next off. Despite the abstract radical intent, the use of metaphor of the cyborg unwittingly reifies the march of capitalism through its infusion technologies as an ontology and represents a novel way for capital maintains domination over nature. O'Hara 3. The more cyborg writing more general content of test police and not police made or hard ways of the future say marginal material reality and nothing interesting virtual cyber anything developed. Eventually the capitalist power could be still in the no worse than ever remember the life to spend ever new values but push even the constant only one most powerful clear not a logical game in town. What does it matter? The material course code and play to be used to make more those equally just one less personality can become whatever he or she wants to be with and the responsible to be not need to be not be worse than but in self-entitlement, what if you know every hour my wobbling more crazy to not to place man view for you and try known can never know the answer by the hope because no one can never know the whole mystery imagine the look out of the body harsh disfigured the boasting imaginary reminding more large part of the prophetic discourse heretic the next big thing modern cultural living monetary transmitted out of the monstrous birth and the affirmative strategy of differentiation abstraction will ultimately be commodified by capitalism which remains the unacknowledged grand narrative of our time only a radical decision is ethically capable of universalizing the struggle against capitalism can result in true emancipation can Macmillan to Macmillan 10. Postmodern is not developed maps and Marxism is not most modernism the values we're getting Marxism Western Marxism from attempt to explain the history of Marxism the economic condition will not produce a revolution as a movement economic culture. What do you think of Marxism which will later consider into the ontology of the express base more rejecting of the idea of revolution altogether capital ability to market being more dominant reduced foundation essential and postmodern with the new fable at the end of back fable normative Christ postmodern can regard deeply conservative much of the ethical thinking of this narrative will come to the back to the use of the narrative because should be for the most part and he is the immediately removal of emancipatory drug and we're going to big celebrity from the active deploying significant grab material change people life we should not make them to celebrating personal content over the political horizon over time postmodern rejection imagine narrative intimately just calendar grand narrative that these period be something to material to grab to the economic country global capital postmodern just the latest form of capital into postmodern actually say capital is proven no instantly the content capitalism right to motion capitalism learn from the postmodern discourse that is meant to react to political question of universal Marxism remains in capitalism precludes ethics through its reduction of all beings to objective instrumentality valued in terms of profit this makes environmental destruction dehumanization inevitable regarding 98. What force area working in the world to block cripple the ethical response capital in the world especially capitalism more than ethical I think anything else everything in nature becomes an obstacle resource an obstacle expansion game development technical growth market for management of nothing value within safety and eyes squaring the eye to consume all of capitalism nothing to a human being planning to live on capitalism he left out only when the end of capitalism on the table we have a seat at the table and the round is key let the discussion become a metaphor condensation for communism voting that means the battle is already won but do 10 there's driven the confines of the state who might be friendly work home with property they work in the state above all names to be possible that everyone can share sharing. The idea is always required communism enables truth to be spoken language with the different land, but for the state to be shaped at once. They have come to link to that incorporating must shift to history and the state. The idea must be a discussion momentary in the word, but the dimension need to be what it is, what will happen, the construction of truth, the first meeting all the way into the internal comparison, the outcome comparison. We must have an idea so as possible dividing land by the state possibly again be shaped to the context of common study the only way of the state case. Extinction comes first, destroys being in the world with others, turns the Afghan to D7. The fundamental extinction of technical error steps for death being urgent, never yet been God, marred depleting the world without the extinction of the Rothenbaum to requires the lack of learning to define feature extinction to be a human alone, hostile and between possibly perpetuity in the temporal platform which protection cast to be asked alone what feature the character of the extinction mode we can say about us what is preparing for an extermination. Liberalism denies the distinction of enmity and thus delimits political state of total war annihilation only preventable through agnostic respect for the enemy benefit and be shy 04. They keep the concept of not enmity destruction self neither nor difficult nor ethical pride serve no moral purchase kind to the other main concern the limit inherent violence system of different inclined position self friend enemy no enemy no friend big the same stuff of the international recognition the universal norm proposed restraining exercise of violence or these valid principle may not the solution problems based on violence of the political will not just go away while modern liberals imagine a world without war. It is this dream which produces the worst forms of violence to absolute extortion. Our duty is not to eliminate war but rather to question the processes and discourses through which it unleashes its true horror. Ratio 5. For this reason there's no more friendly to witness the bloodshed they lead this world the living completely new politics feels like waiting for God up and we're going read the world build while they're nice how it goes on to true go those who know where to limit the war actually by limiting those this truly savage which is war we witness today no matter democrat pacifist Americans Buffett there's a weapon used by no one in the which the declare on can be fought clear on to fight and no to don't friend and new to land for comments non-comments we have gone to the moon found no thing that are to explore salvation globalization global unity equally impossible thing for roughly equating power relation for instead breaks instrumentation and the power of the dream universal inclusion may satisfy request with desire and multiple produce recurring nightmare of absolute incursion in cyber night continues the liberal humanist tradition the devaluation of bodily difference represents the universal
versus that is historically caused violence, Haley's 99. Feel like distinction, not allowing some like to queer to me, can recall liberal swinging subject, posting subject, dynamic, over the night, instrument, you must go to the implying the abolish economic music, cancer, supposed to be the level, show, and separate next for the lemon, and the being sent information across the deposed, human can lead to liberal tradition rather than disrupts this.
Where did you mark that?
Yeah, you finished all the
I finished that.
Yeah, okay. Alright, pretty much in status of things.
Status quo's always not.
Awesome, what's the stat, does the framework also have status or no?
The framework is an argument about the nature of the 1AC and how you were able to defend the plain text and how
And
you
what
were
you're
able to
supposed to
implement that.
Sure. So on the state K, if you will, do you want to call it that? Or?
Yeah, we can call it the
Cool.
same thing.
What is the distinction between macro political change and micro political change?
The argument that the Wood card makes is that there's really no distinction. It's not an issue of your political change, it's an issue that you believe that your form of politics can create change. The Wood evidence is pretty specific about the fact that
when in the 1AC were we like, dude, totally the state is the entire
plan, the
thing?
United States federal government.
Your link is up to plain text of the 1AC.
Yes.
What about the whole like ethical political gesture going into that? Is the actions by the state inherently always bad?
I mean, our evidence is super specific.
I think this is a good
to
question.
cyborg
our
and
alternative
turning the
is specific
cyborg into a manager through the use of the black box, through the use of fiat, through the use of the state.
Right. So is
We don't take a stance on whether or not in general the state is a good or bad thing. We say in this
why
specific
in
instance
this
the state
instance
is
is
bad.
it bad?
The cyborg manager, it's essentially a turns case argument.
Why?
Multiplicity. Can I
Yeah,
answer the
yeah.
question?
Why?
Multiplicity is collapsed into monopoly. The cyborg manager becomes a unified being. Great divides between inside and outside are consistently being assembled. It's the reason why all of the distinctions you try to make to corporate society into one thing become turned away because the cyborg manager.
So is your
just,
like okay?
the
So
cyborg
just for
manager
clarification,
tries to separate
your grassroots activism, right? Do you combine with all other groups or no?
what other groups?
So like there's obviously other forms of grassroots movements, like there's some pro-capitalist grassroots movements that exist,
I mean, yeah,
right?
there are lots of
Libertarians.
grassroots movements that
Do you
exist.
join with those
No,
groups or
we
no?
don't get specific to cyborgs.
I know, but if you're taking our cyborg ethics and your little grassroots movement, if you still are dividing between other grassroots movements, it seems like you're
That's
also
irrelevant.
turning the cyber into a unified being.
Okay, this is absolutely irrelevant because
Okay.
hacking is the counter response to the state in terms of the cyborg. Whether or not we spill over to other forms is not a relevant question as per the 1NC or as per the 1AC.
Let's talk about the cap. What your alternative is a radical decisionist ethics. What does that mean?
No, the alternative calls on the judge to endorse the ballot as a space to envision communism, which is the alternative way that we access all your ethics claims, because you presuppose that the logical progression of technology is something that is inevitable. We break out of that system by allowing
So is
us
technology
to endorse
bad?
another form
The
of
video-
openness.
the
Is
video
technology
evidence-
bad?
The way that you endorse it is bad.
Explain how the way that we
Our
endorse
O'Hare
technology
evidence is
bad.
specific to cyborgs and the progression of us using technology.
That O'Hare
similar
card
to
is in the context of
internet.
Haraway.
It's in the context of cyborg writing.
What
as a
Haraway
whole
says
in
about the
general.
figure of the
Cites
cyborg
Haraway
is all
and then also
imaginary.
cites all cyborg writing and says that cyborgs as a
Really?
political
The
construct.
post-human in this context, not the only but surely most powerful, if clearly not the most logically coherent game in town.
Would you not argue that our lives are becoming increasingly integrated with inanimate beings?
You continue that process.
I know,
Only
but
the
would you
alternative.
do you say that's
uniqueness-
bad, that we should
That's
be-
a uniqueness argument for our alternative, which is the only way
Okay.
to resolve this.
You say that's bad though.
What? Instead of interpreting with the technology, we should be interpreting with the proletariat, which is the only way to assume
Right.
ethics
No
in a
prep.
post-capitalist world.
Framework, case. Let's go statism then cap. Yeah, definitely.
Let me move over so you can like flip to you directly. No, you want to sit over here? You should.
Why? Oh, so I can flip it
Yes,
up.
you can flip it up.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you give the order one more time, please?
Yeah, framework, case, statism, cap.
Hold on, I need to-
Can we switch spots actually?
No. I can pass it.
me will depend on instrumental fiat of the context, and 2, counterprediction will depend upon the context of the ethics of 1AC, and 3, we singularize what debate looks like. We've already foreclosed alternative status quo pounds putting up as unique pedagogical value, which is an independent reason to prefer the real world impacts of the 1AC. That's our counter evidence, and there's no afghan with their interpretation, even as the S&P and DFs require shift the way we approach space this because all policies are inevitably questioned. Ethics and politics, we must offer debate anything else exclusion against 1. A certain knowledge you can do so situate knowledge, not money, consider life. We should critique true ways of knowing teaching, situate knowledge, critique knowledge, make knowledge, unlocated response, subject knowledge. Could always construct it together, must conform to traditional cognition control. Find your position, like the thought of cannot help you reconcile people with the obvious opposition. Systematic domination of all countries, the students who encourage learning about common understandings of the world. And repeat this right, which determine their academic progress. 6 weeks students from their own education because they can take part. This such my students come with a more social cultural. Economic knowledge encourage students to be critical of these fine knowledges, but we will turn their stasis arguments. We think that the debate should be an open space to learn about different things, but we things for cooperation. Obviously, this isn't the case for we. But we think we always other than we will cooperate with you. You can have your arguments. We can control the only meaningful intern like this space education test with space policy is violent. The blind speed of fixed and reasonable is less competing interpretation because race problem, habitualities, and racism are very negative. Ethics away from this education. We win our effects. Ethics of our worship pro. We orient ourselves in the world. We control uniqueness for this education, but lost. Ethics we affirm the model versus research reject here and not the team. We conditionalize the voter. It force contradicts makes me debate against myself. The excuse for church. They steal our best offense and see. It kills them. They go for whatever undercover idiots and unfair time trap. 1C kind of. Christ is next in the other card through a C-special sire, and there's no negative fee because there's no negative resolution. Case. 4 framing issues. A. Extinctions and all trapped in status quo humanist framing the notion of human infinity devalues solving descending reserve and leads to worse acts of violence as our drone and evidence of ethics are ethic of infinite hospitality, infinite otherness is OPRF framing nation in the face of global destruction that's in turn and C. Extinctions only possibly be negative. Their demarcation value in human being ignores the infinite value in all beings makes violence and all that's in turn and E intention the first. Men will never like terminate death matters not because of matters and change, but because someone decides to the being card not the line to debate this argument. But extinction destroying being doesn't make any sense. Our argument says the argument says we're terminally going to go extinct, but we are still able to affirm ethics in the moment. It's the only unique impact they other life would be in all classes of would be able to solve it. Ethics we affirm in the moment that we don't this about ethics is possible. They say to figure this argument we are linked to this. We reject the need of sameness. We are not form of violent liberal inclusion. Instead, we respect all beings as they are. This is the description of the status quo, which means cases uniquely included, but their approach to politics is worse. It's a form of ontological concealment, which are drone evidences and extinction destitute and plus is a type of non-exclusion as for insurance evidence. But the cyborg is the Hales evidence. Hales is an app author. She says in other places that the cyborg, the hero's view of the cyborg is too anthropocentric. That is what this card is talking about, which means the one uniquely breaks it down. Statism. 1 permutation do both and 2 permutation do the economical ethics should be the center for combination A. This most particularly spend 7 minutes 50 seconds justifying our ethics and B. We win our effects and ethics are all that is in C. Our insurance evidence that ethics constitute all politics and power is fluid. Bar 90. Those who find themselves in terms of struggle against power seems to be adequate in the modern period. There's no king of center probably only best order diverse almost the first nature of the present deployment of power is considered single construction to over those who very low so use or consume this one revolt against the complex system of power not just need to grip it. To go give this responsible for putting the system in operation by revolt and against Germany. Question comments remain involved with the function questions. You're not able to by increasing intervention of experts. We are experiencing that politics will link to this argument that's hard. Evidence is in the context of cyber movements and the status quo. We break down this logic by rejecting the logic of control as a whole. We are not attempting. We are not attempting to foreclose or control the cyborg, but we can control uniqueness on all these questions. Space is already being explored by cyborgs violently in the status quo. There's only risk of the ethics of 1AC by breaking down the narrative of the human machine exploration is able to break this down in our use of institutions like the state realizes complicity with power and produces anachronism. The alternative is a string of antis that never produces positive change. Human 2K. Domination comes in the same power radical politics cannot win the illusion that we can in the regime that represses we can never hide. Behind essential settings, the state are based on simple hard things we turn against the institution versus every revolution balances institution when one strict seems to neglect peaceful relations power allowing new institutions, domination versus resistance, forming agonism and permutation do the pun and then the alternative and state fixer running shoot seals makes it impossible us actually debate about anything and it's over legionary. We don't learn about every topic in the 1AC ethics solve the salient embracing of the safety and ethics of community and demand for hospitality all revolutionary checks on violence and yes support. Accountability redefines relationship to economic terms within the same items that work yourself learn more. Do with what's convenient way thinking, acting, and integrating no cars more for this. Unfortunately, the real possibilities. Accountability with responders can make significant contribution to ethical roles since the beginning. Responsibility not center, which is simply acknowledged. Responsibility depends on each of us individual. It is not the society, the problem, the community is the solution. Proximity is the state of attention. In particular, is predicament of moral stuff within the responsibility of help. It's not a personal test for redefining relationship that makes it we might reclaim. We control the root cause of the nation state as humans and logically exploding forward. Logically, the alignment of our middle path is key to solvency to lose 80. Even if the organism of the reformer be the shred, you don't have to DWO without the shred because you feel to violent action, you will be ejected. Because be the worst of the throw the says to the side of the so true the heavier than ever. On the shred and experiment with opportunities on relation with shred of 3 lines of flight.
Also, we are the alternative. That's in the context of pedagogical spheres like debate.
Also, we are the alternative. We are in the context of pedagogical spheres, which like we are a unique challenge to the status violence of that scenario from their footnote of the one you see is the reason they don't solve Campbell 7. In our messy major gradation, conscious over construction ability, with similar to concept of role and security policy continuities between arguments and demonstrate the importance of forward to the production policy, police arrest that process which shapers someone so infiltrate the others, vertical conditions, rest of machine, public careers, or housing agents, and departure. We give to this one new person, replace them, and they solve the after short evidence of the ethics of the one you see to expand unconditionally the fact that here this argument conditionally means that they're not able to solve. Cap. First and mortgage evidence based the DA2 the alternative presupposes the object is that we say that object is something to be endorsed there the lanes of their alternative is logic exclusion that bites into all of our options. 2 we reject violent intentionalities behind technology, but technology itself is fluid damning technology in the ontological level is ultimately more viable leads to extinction through standing reserve and we see ethics of one you see a dis of 2 the alternative we control you need is technology is being advanced and the status quo there's only risk that we're able to move there's non-violent frames where we're approaching technology and ethics are an individual choice they're not able to access because ethics be affirmed, known, be like not improved now. Non-permutation do both, and permutation do the alternative with the monolithic conception of capitalism. Represents any fucking change gives you grab 96. Whether you take socialist solutions of self or other reducing social representation, everything goes apart. Capitalists are generally still representing the world, which economy, quality, culture, and sort of give you reinforce each other where capitalists may say to take seriously the property, social representation, the image of global capitalism, and activity, it's all in global capitalism, with views, big capitalism, generous representation, social one downing performing forces, representation, becomes influential, may contribute to hegemony, hegemonic coordination, not only influence people's ideas about the possibilities, difference between the potential most successful political interventions and the alternative sole use capital is something to be devalued, something to be will distribute the proletariat. We are a rejection of all systems of valuation, which means that we necessarily solve better the supply and the logic of capitalism makes when you see this to the alternative end. They're all things to appeal destroys coalitions. What 98. Marxism is sexualization with the church and new social movements and really cultural the unified Marxism must return. Rituals and perceives the distinction between material and cultural life is stable in the recourse. Research of theoretical and Marxism and the distinction between service effective which she so identified movements are merely cultural. The culture the secondary research would redefine the division between material and culture becomes technically invoked for personal marginalistic certain forms of what activism when we control the root cause capitalism spring from the humanism of spring forth from the humanism of Renaissance and sure, the status quo is now the machinic is now ourselves. We are cyber. Their alternative to rejection that kills ATC makes real resistance impossible. That's our body's evidence.
Also, their link evidence in the context of Haraway.
Also, their link evidence in the context of Haraway. We are something radically different from this. That was explained. But we were an ethical openness, which means that we are a rejection of all systems of evaluation. Any risk that there is a type of violence external to capitalism is something that we reject, but the alternative would not. Unique and not benefit the permutation. Go back to framework. Debate shapes who we are. Bjork 93. I can only start my own debate from who I am as individual, language, some parents, brain tool. It's a powerful medium with the use of political material and consequences of view of the world. Others are making the world as debate, something the collection is scared. You're saying we never be able to change the world, we can change your community, and if we feel we have the real power we have. Go back to the case on the extinction argument. This doesn't make any sense. It presupposes an anthropocentric idea of what is subjecthood, what is able to perceive. You don't know what it's like to be a bad, and this is all self-reflexiveness, which makes our internal evidence that they say to this.
Cool. Alright. Let's talk about a framework. How does our interpretation preclude ethics? When we say that you just need to defend your plan text because you read one.
Okay, if that's your interpretation, then we need it. That's fine.
Cool. That's nice. Let's talk about ethics now. You say ethics are an individual choice. Why does that mean you get to put your ethics onto the rest of the world?
We don't say that at all. We think that our ethics are a good idea. The ballot is an open invitation to endorse our ethics in the context of like our social locations. We certainly are we're an ethic of openness to all beings as they are, letting beings be, which means we would not tell other beings to make their ethics. Like, that's the point.
But then why do you mandate that your ethics come first? That seems like the 1AC evidence is pretty clear about the fact that your ethical choice
first
is
in
a
the context
priority.
of what? Come before what, do you mean?
In the evaluation of the impact.
What do you mean if the ethics is the impact?
Alright, that's fine. I'll talk about that later. Here's your state evidence about all the stuff in key. Which evidence talks about the cyborg? Seems all in the context of
talks about ethical approaches to the state.
So anything that uses ethics, the state is good for it. In the context of your evidence.
No, obviously
it doesn't seem like
does some bad things,
the cyborg.
but this evidence is all really good on working through the state being a better way to approach. You're right. It's not in the context of the way the state approaches cyborg. That's the Lanius evidence from the 1AC.
Okay, so then to clarify, the reason your use of the state is good is because of your use of ethics, then?
No.
Then why is your use of the state
unique affront to a specific instance of violence perpetrated by the state in the 1950s
when they decided to exclude the cyborg from the NASA narrative. However, our evidence is pretty good on the question that when we reject the state as a whole, refuse to work within it at all, that makes achieving actual ethical ends impossible, and it's probably the worst ethical approach because it forecloses the state.
Well, well, the reason
that's fine. I'm moving on now.
We just sort of say this power just solidify and calcify.
Sorry, permutations on each of the critiques are perm do both, perm do the counterplan, and then perm do the pen, and then the alt.
Perm do both was on both.
Okay.
Perm do the counterplan was on the statism pick or counterplan or whatever you want to call it, or alt. If I say counterplan, it's alt, whatever. And then perm do the alt was also on cap.
There was
I
also
think
type perm on from the
there was
type perm on the statism
argument.
Cool. So then, you say that NASA made a choice to not send cyborgs into space. They only sent humans. Then you say all
not
humans
in a literal sense, but like that was the narrative.
Okay, that was the narrative. But then you say that all humans are cyborgs. How is this not a result of sending cyborgs into space in the status quo?
You're right. It's a question. You are absolutely correct. It's a question of the way that we approach these things. The narrative set up by NASA in the 1950s and continued to the present is a logic of the humans as distinct from technology, defined in opposition to it. Really, what our ethics says is that we are constantly constituted by technology, by the inanimateness of the
I understand, but if the end
no,
result is sending cyborgs into space, why does it matter what the original framing was?
Because in the context of, like, you're viewing our plan text way too instrumentally. Like, it's not a question of our plan text being a means to achieve our ethics. The plan is an end point to our ethics.
Ethics and politics are separate for the same.
No problem.
Do you need an order?
I do.
Yeah, one of those screen plays. Wait, what's happening to Zach? Seriously?
What did Zach go on up?
Con.
Awesome. Against, who is he debating?
GB. I think their F is shotgun. You gotta be like,
You agree? They're after. So that after. So shotgun.
Alright, stop right. Pass me a jump drive.
Are you guys keeping track of prep, or do you want us to?
I was trying to, but it just reset whatever it was when I hit start.
We have 7:04 left.
Sounds good.
I can write that down.
What is the timer, dude? Yeah, that would be awesome. Thanks. No problem.
Can we get our Walmart time back?
I'm sorry, you said 7:04?
Yeah.
If you want to see Octos, you should get it.
Yeah.
I might need to do some stuff. Where did that thing?
What thing?
That thing.
The STEM thing.
And just because this is a paper debate, here's the hodgepodge cards.
Alright.
Hodgepodge. Hodgepodge.
Yeah, I'll take that. Good.
Oh, catch.
Oh, shoot, that was awful.
Aw.
I had such a good catch yesterday.
I had a diving catch on 4 over just.
I'll be good. Awesome. The order is framework cap with an overview case. Are y'all ready to go?
What's it called?
2NC Octos.
Starts with impact.
Yep.
D.
Ready?
Okay. What about, hold on for me. Sorry, let me get situated. Is that either? I'm ready then.
Our interpretations also their offensive forbid if don't have to introduce plain text and the 1AC. Our other argument is what they do in structure, means by which we prepare, engage, and conduct ourselves in the course of the debate from a strategic standpoint. If they hadn't read a plan, they wouldn't have to defend what that means. A topical version of the affirmative false, all their offense would have been ready to see what, how their plan, the way they choose to view the world, guarantees totalitarian politics because it ensures that's all the stasis argument. It's not neutral, descriptive. Structural states point for the comment that structure kills skill bidding sense and decision-making patterns that prove about the wider way of diversity that it debate. Take, for example, GDS's sci-fi aspect, introduces creativity. All the rounds run on hedge suit arguing the government should control things. All the rounds one on the bar card arguing that structural issues of racism are more important than anything else. All the rounds that dynasty one on capitalism and reals and all those topical cases, their interpretation allows their argument to debate all results in the same thing as seriously still the alternative team and argument went rounds all the time. Their destruction of the world and debate is inevitably exclusionary. It's not true, it's just a way of looking at things. This way is bad. It's the closest political case for movement and change these resistances such as those listed above are understood as falling back into the same. This turns the apple of creating new political possibilities and dissent to all their framework argument. Now this argument is also impact defense, all their ethics. Like we shouldn't view the world as inevitably structured by the force of the aftertakes, but as an open, unpredictable movement. It's dangerous to understand takes of their framework, takes the beach desire as they pretend they're the condo argument. We got two critiques of the status quo. Condo as rational policymakers have the option of the status quo when they do decide to read a plain text as well as some positional ethics statement. We get to test the ethics statement and counterplay that Solo's logical model of decision making. There's no impact to time skew. They should do seatbelts or hand contained thinking forces argument and force in a small amount of time. Also dispel boxes the work argument. Condo forces that make strategic decision make on changing condition. Also create strategic about the ideological states. I'll get that better now. Defend the plain text. That's all the arguments from above. Now, next flag is the last argument. 1A and 2A are get away with massive extrapolation. That we need no condo to overcome 2F. There were 17 broken in the tournament. Now, the last argument is on the other flow. However, answer it here first off is that the ethics of conditionality is bad. It's cured fairness against critical acts. It's hard to predict what they can happen. So we need multiple agents to preempt morphing. No, unfair bad debate's bad because the negative are winning. It's politically bad because there's no dialectic absent engagement with their framework statement. Also, unique side bites against critical acts. We have to prepare for a dozen exterior liberal. They just enter cap and framework ditching to supercharges the expertise rap. They're also logical decision maker arguments that just have multiple forms of scrutiny. Create the most rigorous truth kept in any framework. We all make decisions. The demand for fixed commitment is the formula for blind groupthink. They ban the brainstorm. It also wrecks the judge face. If you reject objectivity, you reject minimum intervention. Every debate becomes a referendum on your real belief, making the worst judge ever. No neck field answers all. We answer all their no neck field arguments. I'll go to the K argument. They've conceded a couple arguments, all which are independent impacts into the case. First off is the internal link turn to the hair evidence, which is the critical chic argument. Their criticism become the ultimate godlike critical point of view. They don't take technology as good or bad, whether a plan of action is good or bad, where science is good or bad. They just adopt the perspective of the domination itself is bad, which is non-falsifiable. The attempt to blur the distinction between the human and the non-firm is the critical version of the ultimate strategic gaze of humanism. They're the mirror image of the American fighter pride that bombs people from an unreachable height listening to Van Halen, becoming part of the system. They don't critique the logic of the human. They only end up incorporating the only things that are still not human, i.e. nature, the inorganic, the molecules of life making, the logic of humanism, all more encompassing their attempt to produce new value structure lies trapped within the humanist project, which means there's zero reason that you should vote affirmative in this instance because we've internal linked term the only offensive argument they have. The second is the capitalism impact in the world where the ultimate logic of capitalism is to break down all boundaries so we can equally be concerned with the postmodern attempt to reclaim science and technology from domination to become a marketing tool for global capitalism. And the very attempt to critique commodification will cause that this turns the case they've conceded more great evidence that indicates that capitalism is the ultimate presuppositional ethics question, which is an argument that is conceded by the 2AC, which means you should not let the 1AR get away with it. They've also conceded the environmental destruction impact, which excesses all their arguments, because all their arguments about why extinction is a bad method of plagues are granted an anthropocentric zoology, which means we access the extinction of all life on Earth. I'll get to that more in the case debate. The alternative is the best offer. You can't do a calculus problem because you don't know calculus. Using geometry wouldn't solve because you're acted. It'll just get you failed out of school. We don't understand something. The thing to do first is reflect and try to understand why we don't understand the problem. Now, go to the line by line. First off, the group of the first three argument, they all assume a suppositional uniqueness point value that technology is bad and increasing the status quo, which is not a symptom of our humanist logic, but a symptom of capitalist logic. Our O'Hare evidence is on point in the status quo that the global progression of capitalism leads to drive to produce the most profitable motive that inevitably leads to the development of new technology like the internet, which is supposed to broker and facilitate a critical divide between the readers and poor. Never happens. They are just the continuation of that progression of capitalism. The O'Hare evidence is specific on all these arguments, which means you cannot access their impact. Now the ethics argument, they the impact of the criticism and ethics. This consideration comes first before evaluation of humanism. That's a Mortgage evidence 3 argument. First off, the most ethical political responsibility is challenge the subordination of capital. You don't have to be a philosopher to tread the line between economic disparity and the ability of the market to dominate socializations. In the case of the affirmative user struggle, not against the particulars of their policy, but again against the organizing principles that produce the foundation for things like NASA to not incorporate the vision of humanism. Sense quote. Now forget the big other. The ethic of the 1AC can't be political because it always relies on higher external authority. Outline and implement ethical strategy. This depoliticized ethics is never progressive for the oppressed. Now the permutation debate. Whoops, they conceded the postmodern, and like that's the Macmillan evidence in the 1AC. He should not get an on-point response to this on the 1AR because there's not word one on this in the 2AC. Co-ops of link term specifically because postmodernism is always subjected by capitalist forces. They co-opt it for their good. The reason why Zizek is the Starbucks of philosophy. If we want to link to the formula politics advocated in the 1AC, i.e. cyborg subjectivity, the entire critique functions a dis-head to the permutation. It's impossible for you to quote-unquote do both. Our evidence is on point on this question. The compulsion to act is a component of our socialization to the humanist framework of progress and enlightenment. We've been taught when we see suffering is our moral duty to intervene. Is the impulse to act is the embodiment of the impulse to try to manage a world whose infinite complexity precludes the ability to manage it. In fact, the management is the cause of instability in all their violence in the first place. Our O'Hare evidence is very specific that there's no solution to the problem of Western humanism underlying nihilism. Only the alternative solves by incorporating a global framework of struggle against all programs, the economic system that creates humanism. Status quo. Now the link to Bacon's here. Although postmodernism stuff is above, however, cyborg writing is bad. It reifies the modern obsession with technology, incapable of thinking outside the ontological assumption, the necessity of a technological problem that co-ops the permutation. O'Hare evidence gives the example of the internet, which instead of brokering entering the game changer between the rich and poor, the status quo intended facilitated by and made a slave to the system, proved by every time you check your Facebook while you're on vacation. Their unnecessary dependence on postmodern technology is said to broker critical divide. Gives in great evidence who can group all their arguments to Marxism and status quo. But two evidence answers this on point, saying using Marxism as a historical reference is not what the alternative does. Instead, it looks towards the future and looks towards the past to recreate struggles of Marxism and allow to think. We get to no link out of their alternative defense argument because it merely supposes that the judge imagines the best form of Marxism. That creates a pedagogical space. You should cross-apply all his arguments on framework why this is the most important ethical consideration. They don't do that because there's still structural problems with this status quo that prevent them from solving all the impacts. This applies to their Gibbs and Graham evidence as well as the Butler arguments. The next argument that they're going to go for is the root cause argument, i.e. humanism is the root cause or capitalism cannot spill over to all forms of all their arguments. However, capitalism is the root cause of all social relations because economic rationality is at the sub point of how we are able to calculate value, i.e. humanism is bad. However, capitalism is what gives humanism its teeth and allows us to exploit the people in internal link terms. Intersectionality footnotes the criticism of capitalism. Only a prioritization of our struggle has the potential of universalizing our foreign politics. McLaren and about to forget for the important impact differentiators report from well North race class gender triply sound more standards on race class and gender co-primary categories. Some people are oppressed but for the rights other because the class this grossly mostly individuals manifest certain characteristics in the oppression growth other the class of got a practical social dimension of the form different class cut from the political economy and class of exploration. Those who control the produce resources not only do so value generated but those any post-market shift the idea of classes namely except for a universal form of exploration market exploration. The last argument is that that last argument is that it was not talking about Haraway. Our evidence specific to postmodernism in general, which means once you reject the part that talks about Haraway, which is not the link to the criticism, all the postmodernism arguments as well as all our evidence about post-humanism still apply to the affirmative. Yared, quick second present. Do you see this? Can you define biological extinction? Yeah. Stop that. Process.
Yep. All right. First question, I guess, pretty important to tell. Why is capitalism universal?
What? Capitalism is universal because it's the way that globalization functions on a larger scale. Humanism is also universal.
Okay, so
however, the difference between humanism and universalism is humanism is genetically produced, whereas capitalism is what makes humanism dangerous. Our McClary and Allen
why is
evidence as well as the
humanism
O'Haram. What? Well, the thing is this. Humans naturally identified by certain biological traits. Our O'Hare evidence makes this argument. It says that the production of technology to counter humanism is the wrong strategy to take because it reproduces the humanism. That's a conceded
The
argument.
fact that humanism came out of the 14th century, how the hell can you say
Sure.
it's genetic?
The progression from the 14th century to now, when we've developed things like weapons of mass destruction, poverty, that's all increased exponentially since the 14th century.
Okay, Bennett,
the difference between that was
Bennett,
capitalism,
that's
which
fine.
emerged onto the
Bennett,
global scene.
Bennett, your answer to technology is fluid is the internet. Like
What?
how, in the
No.
context of things like social revolutions in the Middle East,
Yeah, no,
against
our
the force of
O'Hare evidence
capitalism
on
based on the internet, like Twitter revolutions and stuff.
Our O'Hare evidence makes this
Doesn't
on
that
point.
dispute
No,
the argument
our
that
O'Hare
technology is
evidence
fluid?
makes this on point argument to the internet analogy, and it says specifically that while it has led to some revolutions, the overall goal of the internet employs corporations, i.e. corporations will co-opt the internet to use it for their own games. For example, IP addresses and the selling
But isn't
of like
that-
local
Bennett,
things is an
Bennett,
pure
Bennett,
example of how the internet
Bennett.
has been co-opted to globalize
Bad.
capitalism.
Bennett,
What?
doesn't the fact that people have
Yo, you
used the
can't just like
internet
yell at me like a dog, dude. That's humanistic shit. Maybe a please would be nice.
I love you.
You're a great kid.
All right. Anyway, I guess doesn't the fact that different people have empirically used the internet for different things prove that technology is a question of
Sure, but
intentionality
you
and
have
the
to
way
look
that we
at the
approach
net.
it?
Which is why the capitalist dominance that refocuses technology on specific things co-ops the affirmative and means it can't actually solve for humanism. Only the alternative can solve
what
this
does the
because the difference
co-opted
between
version of the
technology being
affirmative
used
look
for
like?
good
How are we
and
co-opted,
technology.
but you're not?
No, hold on. The
Explain
difference
that to
between
me.
technology being used for good and technology being used for bad is how it's deployed. Our argument indicates when technology is used for globalist purposes, i.e. your affirmative, versus non-globalist purposes.
Okay, so if we were able to win the affirmative is not a globalist purpose.
I think it's a little too late for that because there's not an argument in the 2AC that answered the postmodernism argument that says it's co-opted by capitalism, as well as the internal link turn to humanism.
Unless, like, never mind. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I know you're going to make one, but there was no argument on this in the 2AC.
At this point.
What?
What?
All right. I guess I still do not understand how the fact. Wait. I still don't understand. What does the cooperative version of the affirmative look like? Describe that to me.
It's the affirmative. The cooperative version of the affirmative used cyborgs for militaristic purposes, and it
The
continues
affirmative-
the cycle of technological progress. For example, when we developed the internet, we thought it was going to be awesome. We thought it was going to broker the divide between the rich and the poor, and allow them to access peer-to-peer sharing and other things that would broker that divide. It did not.
But like in the same time, it's like
Alright, the order is going to be briefly on the bottom of the cap flow, and then
It's on the case flow.
sorry, on the case flow. Then use a debate.
Where's my stick? What just disappeared?
Hold on, I gotta find it.
yeah, definitely. It's just the bottom of cap and then the pip.
I hate
Oh,
paper.
sorry, bottom of case, and then the thing. Isn't that it?
No, this is here's case, here's the cap K, here's stasis.
It's a giant piece of paper. How did you lose it?
Is it like on the ground there?
It could be, but this looks like what's this? No. Yeah, this is whack. I apologize.
Alright. Is this it?
Hey, there we go.
You get back
good
to
to go.
spreads.
Over there.
Okay.
I don't know.
Right. Okay. I think that's frustrating. Getting evidence. Wow. Alright. I guess I hope you might have been in there.
Yeah.
Probably under the floor.
So case, case statism.
Yeah.
Can we get the flashlight?
I gave it to you.
Oh yeah, I need to go first.
Or not this. Yeah, that's one. Starts with even if.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
Alright.
Everyone's set.
Yeah. Death debate. Even if they are correct about the biological impact of death, extinction kills common being in the world without those which an aesthetic good thorough interpretation of human extinction requires an ontology of trash or affinity. Evidence separates the argument with our extinction level impact on the Cape because all living matter is aesthetically valuable, and living matter must be affirmed aesthetically valuable as aesthetically valuable Schwartz and Organ set. Metabolic activity on the organism be characteristics extending these things of the organism being being issues metabolism of the organism for the sake of continuous in the own being metabolic actually contemporary and the organism. This means that some fundamental of the organism positive on to do as good in order the organism positive on the existence having positive balance moral need to combat death issue from the organism and internal striving therefore need to through their lower system that it does not die through the addition more precise level to the organism for the world becomes relative to the relation to feel many organisms send to the elements of their environment against applies to individuals to conglomerate to a whole organism sensitivity is the first subjectivity in organism mental life against where sensitivity outside is felt state. Firstly, the overview. The plan requires multiplicity of humanity, which they solve through the cyborg. It blends natural and non-natural. The government kills that cyborg, turns into a standardized way to view politics. Their use of fiat is the opposite of what they talk about. This is one thing, moving in the concert all at the same time, ongoing vocally, and only techniques of governmentality and formal organization threats. Now the multiplicity they want to create. Secondly, is disembodiment. Even if we are already cyborgs, it's a question of our material embodiment, who we are at the material level. The practice of fiat is disembodied. This gets away from material reality. We're not actually government policymakers. We don't displace our agency onto the state. I'll put the case debate here, the terms case debate, but here. But if the key framing issue is that even if we don't go for the counterplan of the terms, case debate still functions in the independent dissent, almost to take out to the act is rooted in the 1AC action of the affirmative, centralizes democratic engagement around the state. This creates an epistemological barrier to substantively alternative forms of agency. Billigan 2K. State is understood here as concept law, loyalty, and state strength, psychological plans, state requires religion, very existence, state privilege, nice requires the different state centers, state-centered approach me end up reading for state by running the invisible, putting reference and bureaucracy will copy plan. There are too many interventions from all levels to allow for any true change to occur. Cohen 85. The blood spread and choice control show good going very wrong. Real block organizational level reformance versus blood always on the cooperative wrong. You don't completely transfer them. All the troubles not the original summary of the program into strategy to say program for working constraint on the organization the alternative the alerts don't go versus sabotage undermine distorted manipulate for cooperative displacement glass versus the organization restraints have been set up and super powerful program all works cannot try to all the good these old guard good intentions say better service to police judge prosecute critics the most powerful actors in the system and now the permutation debate perseverance they read a plan crossfire from the stasis debate that they have to defend the plan two topical versions of the F either don't defend a plan text or always defend they have established a status framework and they want to see does the negatives right to test the germaneness of the framework to the plan itself. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. Reliance on the law rights exonerates the individual of responsibility and backways to let value to life by making all guilty or 04. Legal subtraction or illegal infinitely legal power no complicating himself without a lot to will be undermined more state and skip rule of law thus responsibility the individual becomes legal and to exonerate me from the responsibility of others law seeks by regulating to individually done as virtual the others becomes face making it too easy for me to join to man just to answer for the other parts of the worst the unconditional responsibility my own existence becomes their imminent fight plus being single is guilty that causes mass genocide to 2K and ethics transfer the nature the real source meaning makes it possible to kill males who do not that they're God's because the some nation has got to already decision they could live this most insignificant viewers think he's got to be insignificant bureaucrat the right to answer is imperative to recognize the infinite which can be brought up in action now they say they solve this but however if we win the co-option comes to the issue of time frame the government uses the cyborg badly it means because they implemented it now this checks back the delay term to only a risk of co-option now they say the control unique cyborgs are relevant because we went to the side the state is what the lens is viewed through the cyborg. The alternative hackers the only way to resolve the question of uniqueness. Now they say the alternative fails. However, our evidence is comparative in the fact that hackers are better in the case of cyborgs specifically. The key determining issue is whether or not they're reading evidence in the context of cyborgs. They're flat out not. Now the alternative rejects the disembodied pedagogy of the plan we are ourselves performing a cyborg ontology. If they are right that the cyborg is human, then we acknowledge that distinction. They are teaching us about the body critical pedagogy evidence. However, we are the practice their call on the state is a call on the other the big authority that will validate their intention. The critical grassroots approach is better. We are cyborgs. We recognize that fact. We are performing our subjectivity right now. They don't perform. They just call us to state now. They say middle ground. However, the divorce of the self from others, privilege is knowledge of the self fact. We are real related to others. We care for the self. How we should orient ourselves to this fact. This is the root of the laws, legislation, morality, concept, biopolitics, concludes ethics. Foucault, 82. Know yourself is to take care of yourself. We find a basic numerics, morality, principles. If you should take more yourself into the world we're in here. The psycho traditions and the law, basic morality. How you can interpret the self, basic morality. No, as if you take care of yourself because morality insists the self can be one that can reject the modern one. That consists of fundamental principle process. Now they say the
you need to answer this Pick's bad argument.
And they say
cross-apply all the conditionality arguments.
Cross-apply the arguments that are framing evidence checks back. In this specific instance, we get to test their framing arguments because they have agreed to defend the plan text. Now they say the affirmative checks back, or they recreate all their impact claims to the state. They want to see what evidence says the government implementation of cyborgs makes things that worse. Now they say middle ground worse. That was answered, but they say the state is key to action. However, this is fundamentally unproven by our state links. Now they say performance of this is silly. We're the only ones actually performing the right. We acknowledge that we are all cyborgs. Only negative uses that in the right. It's just
just a call to action of the state instead of the negative use of the hacker is our personal existence as a cyborg, and here's the internal link term. We shouldn't displace our agency further of a demand upon the state causes violence and evacuates out of Capital 95. Focus on the major posters are responsible leading powerless citizens and feel secure, non-responsive decisions are made elsewhere. Seems involved in resolution action events. We think we cannot do anything better work this way. This way we share responsibility for violence. 2 seconds.
Okay.
Go 701.
701. We didn't use it.
No, I'm sorry, that was them. Sorry, you have 10.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Jeff, did you hear back from Sarah?
Yeah, she's good, she's good.
Usually he gets nervous.
I know. I'm
Oh, really? Right, right.
So luckily it didn't stay up to 12, 15 years.
Plus it counts now. They're all hyped up. They know this is
It's do or die.
do or die.
You see Nathan's phone coming back. So he doesn't always do.
The mind's connected to the foot. As the foot wiggles, the mind wiggles.
Oh no, it's really okay. This is not what it is.
Right.
Can you explain this to the post-modern like
Oh, it's just that the essence of like critical leftism is co-opted by capitalism. It makes it the structures available for the capitalist and that co-ops the permutation as well as it makes it doesn't question structural barriers.
Not bad. 625.
Do we have the stand?
Yeah, I put it. Alright. There's going to be case, then framework. Case, framework, status, and decade. Okay, stop. 5 seconds.
Sorry.
Everyone ready? Right. Right. Well, then, is it the distinction of on the like control that's a control evidence to the Earth, the same or seems to be an independent distinction that's our second thing. Continue the ethical obligation to the other that is our control evidence. We always ourselves because we are constituted by others. This comes to the first before their intention because it's the way that we ethically order ourselves in the surrounding extinction. It may be bad, but only if you assume the value exists in the eye beholder, i.e. their aesthetic arguments. Our argument is that value exists ontologically within everything living, matter may be bad, but so is not living matter. Anything else is a logical conclusion that's our control evidence. They've also conceded the unique discussion that all matter is going to be inevitably destroyed between the ethics and be affirmed more than exactly their clock. They've also conceded the link turn on the rash evidence that liberal peace is necessarily bad. And this is not going out with the plans to rupture the way. And the rinsing of the 1AC is that we rupture the necessary. That is a mechanism of the plan to extreme. That is an external add-on that they have dropped. That is offered to the cap A as well as stated this. And now they've also conceded the intentionality and the clock evidence. The only thing that matters is whether the something we want to say from now. We mean their framework arguments. We will defend the plan, but our argument that you should not try to separate that from the broader political strategy. The 1AC, yes, we read a plan text, but that's in the context of ethics. That is our control evidence. The ethical justification of what is important. We have provided a pedagogical method of voting affirmative resistance of the idea of closure to openness towards others, which means you can vote affirmative independently of these rest of these arguments to prove that voting affirmative has real-world scholarship, real-world impact by endorsing our scholarship. That is the thesis of our patent evidence, which is also a dissent to their interpretation because the idea of a sadness and a closed topic eliminates the possibility for creativeness, which means a stronger controlling to their arguments about problem solving, not going conditionality, but they should not be allowed to advocate or ethics. They decided the right kind of unconditional, which means that their advocacy from the get-go was under a strategic lens. Our argument is our things that have to be unconditional. We have evidential statements that it's our strong ethics. Their ethics of conditionality are bad. Their dialectic argument does not make any sense. You are providing opposition this round. You could have ran the kind of blend unconditional. You should not try to protect that. This is separate from the matter of conditionality as a good argument for debate because this is the ethics of the speech actor. The one to see now the status of this property. There's going to be a lot of cross applications of that. It's exactly what happens when you drop a lot of argument. The government mentality is not surely affirmative. We do not defend fiat in terms of role playing, but rather as a form of the political strategy. The one to see there's no link to the real good argument because our ethics are about this. That's necessarily self-argument says or stand out. So we want to see we also a better challenge of the performance of the subjectivity argument that they make on the Catholic case. It's exactly why their conditionality ethics do not solve our argument on prohibition. Both their God evidence is about grassroots movements of cyber activism in the form of education in the classroom. That is exactly what the 1AC is. We are students discussing a curriculum, getting into you, the educational. You are the teacher, but we are starting the such form, and you will provide context back to the 1AC, which proves that the discourse and this speech check the 1AC is necessary key. The permutation is not subject only to the result evidence, which is one check because the pedagogues want to see, oh, you conceded power is fluid. Here's the laughing moment. The universal does not necessarily exist because power does not exist. It's only articulated necessary to certain institutions, but it can be reclaimed. This proves the thesis by the Cap area, why the Cap is necessarily better. The state case had no link to their capital evidence, but this is actually offense for us because it assumes that individuals, not structures, cause oppression. If this argument is seriously true, then their just rejection of capitalism does not solve the more arching mindset of capitalism, which is exactly why we do not link to this argument. But their isolation of the power is the problem is the state, or the problem is capitalism as an institution is exactly why the affirmative is able to solve. Now they have conceded our human evidence. This is a dissent both as the ToC as well as the capitalist case. It assumes that power fluid. Their idea of rejecting the institution makes resistance really impossible because all it does is calcify power into a new form of institution that has more oppression. They might resist capitalism or the state, but the result is just a more powerful version when they leave. That's a conceded argument. No new true no. That's a conceded losing guard argument. You cannot resist the strategy must work through institutional reform to resist the path of power to power takes. Exactly why their removal of state of capitalism just makes it worse. Now the capitalism does some power. Their O'Hare arguments in the context of we do not blur distinction between biology and abiology. That argument is that even though they are separate, they are interplayed and intertwined, which is why the separate doesn't keep their Also, we do not concede that capital through ethical argument. They concede the analysis always to win is that there's no oppression outside capitalism. If you think you follow when things occur without capitalism, you can vote affirmative things like anthropocentrism, anthropocentrism, ableism, sexism necessarily, ageism. All these things exist independently of doing capitalism. The structure not permission both necessarily solve the majority of the link arguments. The crux of their argument necessarily is that there will be some form of co-option, but we have just said through that interpretation also no co-option in the case of cyber Brandasa. In 11 they voting in several different things that the cyber says shifting is redundant. This will not be case between the basis extreme, the human and the non-human. The cyber is a members of race and non-body concept displeasure appears as technology out of control may fear they'll follow the hunch of the fellow arguments as flow changing. As the amendment they really just exist one possibility. No there's also no scientific proof why humanism is a level that the threats are in 6 truths with the tech behavior and read backwards evolution back to the explanation of the behavior and 24/4. They're a sort of knowledge about social biology and conservative and political scientific tools that safe limitation things that all they are such a naturalized. The church is nothing to behaviors natural preclude the ability to make choices violent arguments about classical nature of relying on classic oversimplification of arguing that they concede peace or gifts and grandness that their argument is pedagogically important. But if it is true that capitalism is not universal, then actually that makes real existent popular structures. That means voting for the pedagogy and the scholarship of the one C is necessarily bad because it's impossible to create real change. It proves thesis why even if the reality matters in the round, if those don't have real world impacts, no reason to vote for it.
Y'all have 7.
Power cord?
You want to unplug the one that's here?
Okay. I think you can.
Yeah. Hold that up. You should be good.
A second. It's in between my. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
If it was 70%,
No, we don't. The next thing.
Until I started doing it, I didn't remember the sense of time. Once I timed it, to get the time slower for all of this is so much, and that it's incredible. Every time I think it's got to be, you got to give this halfway through, so 2 minutes have been taken over. It's incredible.
I know, but you brutalize. You're like 2. I'm sure. Yeah, I use this only I can drink it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you finish it.
Do you want a rock with a lemonade?
Sure, you got it, girl.
Let's drink up.
Go see if he wants us to cut it.
I love it. I thought so. Whatever I've heard, I need the doctor.
Oh, the doctor. He's got the doctor. He's good. That's his stuff.
Is it fruit?
It is. It's prune soda.
I thought it's 23.
No, Dr. Pepper used to be prune soda. Now it is not. It's they changed it. But yeah, originally that's why it was Dr. Pepper.
Isn't that
I don't know why I'm using my twin arm to do this, but I
Yeah, don't do it. We can talk about it afterwards.
That's why he's
Do your work.
That's why he's Dr. Pepper, because it was originally supposed to be a laxative.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
10, 2, and 4.
I know.
That's when you're supposed to take it.
So you're supposed to go 3 times a day? Really?
Is it?
Yes. Isn't that disgusting? That's what they call it.
Do you ever drink sport though? That's pretty good. It's really good.
Oh. Well, I don't like grapes.
Fruits and proteins and shit. And some of the last is after
So wait, hold on. The plain text as you're defending it in the 1AR is the plain text plus ethics claims, or is it only ethics?
It's always been plain text plus
Okay,
ethics.
all right, fantastic.
Like arguments that like ethical justifications are more important.
All right.
All the evidence is exposed.
Yeah, I think it's one.
It's almost like with Vinny and remember
Oh,
my
my
cousin
cousin
Vinny?
Vinny?
She goes, he has to show you the evidence. If he doesn't, locked here.
All right.
State pick. Cat K case.
No moment. Oh, no. Sorry.
Ready?
Yeah. What's that?
Ready? We're not going for the pick, however, you can see the search case analysis and independent data satellite search for server felt the capital evidence is conclusive that violence comes from the state, but it's the app's individualism term is nowhere in the card, only so presume that all power can come from the state. That is a dissent to their interpretation. Also, Newman evidence is conceded or would evidence specific to cyber preferred over generic evidence in the context of the affirmative rejection. The state is key, even if it doesn't work in general. The specific instance is all that matters, so you should default to specificity. That's a perm debate. Now the link debate, they're inherently tied to the action of plan through the state cross-apply from the framework debate. As you evaluate the plan, some part of it must be the framework debate, which means there's at least a risk of our offense that they have straight up dropped in the 1AR. The state is their basis for morality. The two are inherently tied. The second is the Foucault evidence, which is conceded that says that the state is basis for morality. That independently linked to a conceded genocide impact that they concede. You have no ethical framework that supposes that genocide cannot be rejected first. Now the use of the state terms case, there's 3 years. The first off is co-option. That's a dissent to the permutation. While the Wood-Village and Cohen evidence is fantastic in the case of cyborg, the use of the state capital collapses multiplicity. Things like the black box of beyond the lack of identity state means their multi-voice will become side. Second is disembodiment, which is conceded. If we already cyborg, it's a question of our material embodiment, who we are at a material level. The practice of fiat is disembodied. This gets away from our material reality. We're not actually government policymakers. We don't displace our agency upon the state. The app does, which is networks for their policy. On the average relies on a material embodiment of the app that kills fiat. That's what first off is the conceded Rousseau term. That's above the use of the law kills value to life, which is an independent dissent to all their permutation questions. Now the cap arguments will few link arguments are conceded all with their independent impacts in terms of case. He's really made a muck of this debate. First off is the internal humanism link term. The only answer to this is that humanism is inevitable. Their evidence isn't specific to their act. However, their criticism become the critical point of view. They don't say whether technology is good or bad, whether a plan of action is good or bad, whether science are good or bad. The only as stands to the 1AC text is that otherization and dominization is self the bad, which is a falsifiable position. They don't actually critique the logic of humanism and the violence it creates. They incorporate the only things that are still non-human, like nature, the inner granitic, and the matter of life. They blur without creating separate distinction between the two. Only the alternative is able to remedy this case. There's not an argument to this. Now, the next argument is capitalism. They concede the terminal impact. Environmental destruction is inevitable in a world where you allow capitalism continue. That's our Morgaray evidence. It breaks down all batteries so we can equally be consumers. That technologically progresses things to a point where we can no longer return from any of the claims. That is a dissent to the having something there. Extinction and inevitable syndication there don't apply because extinction is biological death, and as you kill people, there is an inherent value to life as every single human and animal has died, which turns their humanism arguments because they allow the death of several thousand animals as well as humans, which means only our impact access is the case. This is nowhere in the 1AR. Now the tiebreaker is ethics. We at least access some form of their ethics as the government, not in the cyborg or humanism capacity, then in the otherization of class, which we access some way for the judge of value to the ethics. Our Jorgensen evidence makes no distinction between the two, which means you should not allow any 2-8-hour framing questions. Also, a huge argument here. This is the stasis point of this debate. They have conceded the intersectionality argument is not whether which came first or whether something can exist something outside of something. Capitalism is the teeth by which which humanism and all other forms of domination are operated. This is a turn to their argument they cannot collapse. Even if we do not win an alternative or any other structural reason, you should still vote for negative on presumption because they don't do anything. The continuation of capitalism necessarily recreates the harms of humanism and means the affirmative cannot solve because it has created the governmental processes and the industries to which the affirmative is produced in the status quo, and all their harms are produced in the status quo. This is not answered to specifically by the 1 AR, which means you should have a very high threshold for all their arguments. That's the impact level of the argument. Now the permutation debate. They first off scratch all the permutation evidence. It's not predictable by the 2AC, and there was a link barrier in the 2NC that says he cannot read any white evidence. Anyway, this co-option evidence is horrible. Says that we should try to prevent co-option. Does not actually say, well, actually be co-opted. They still conceded the postmodernism link, which accesses all those spillover claims. It means only capitalism can answer all of his arguments because it means that postmodernism dilutes and is encompassed by capitalism, which means they have no spillover from humanism into any other forms, i.e. race, gender, and class. Only capitalism can access that, which means there's still some otherization in the world of the affirmative, which means you default to our argument. They've also conceded our link to based off cyborgization. That our evidence is on point on this question. The component acts as a component of the social relation to the humanist framework of progress. All the internal link terms are disadded to the permit at the top of the argument. Now our O'Hara evidence is a basic argument that the modern obsession with technology is incapable of thinking. They've conceded structural uniqueness for any disadd to the permutation when they concede that technological development is fluid and inevitable in the status quo. Only the rejection of capitalism can format this into a better model, and they still link to it because they continue to progress it. Obviously, the question of whether the specific to the app is a question for the after on. The last argument is the Gibson and Graham argument. This is horrible. He's conceded we don't need actual structural defense of the alternative. It's not. Judge has to endorse a specific movement in a mindset. I envision the model of global capitalism, which means all Gibbs and Graham's critique of breakdowns and movements of capitalism are not applicable to our argument, which presumes that the judge can endorse it, which means we get the most utopian vision. This is explained in the 20 and not answered by the 1 hour, which means you should default to the best interpretation possible.
How many? Y'all have 620.
620. Yeah, excuse me. You have 620. All right. No, stay here.
That's not nice. Mine's like a swap. It's got the like, computer in it. Oh, I like that.
I think this is orange. That looks like it. She leaves it literally everywhere. That's good. Heads up.
Case, framework, statism. I'm gonna use the bathroom first. Alright.
Come on, just go.
Fine. So sad.
Goes too fast.
Right, talk fast.
Hey, sir, still two conceded impacts of voting affirm. The first is our ethics of empathy and see the thesis of love and actually ethics that we always radio aware so the other because we are constantly by optimists, which means that only the affirmative has an access to ethics. I also concede trend evidence, which means that the logical control necessitates extinction through setting reserve means that any material impact of it is washed within. You can see that materiality does not matter. That is our Clark evidence. It does everything is going to be terminally destroyed. We are all going to die. We are finite beings. In a trillion years, the universe's expansion will destroy the possibility of any matter existing, which means it's a question of the ethical choices of the moment. That's the only unique impact, which means that all their co-option arguments are fundamentally wrong because the affirmative makes an individual choice to act ethically, which is the only real impact in the not framework. They have dropped pedagogy add on this is an out-of-round impact, which means that necessarily we outweighs their in-round impact to capitals, and they are still to second this frame. Do not do the work for them. Bennett does not go to this flow to do or make any argument as to why they would be able to access our political strategy of openness. The one you see questions of relationship to the topic, they suck in their debate arguments, which means they do not work. These are yeah. There's also evidence on the state which we have conceded proves this argument that it is a question of students speaking in pedagogical space in pursuit of the narrative of the cyborg that's uniquely able to break down violence. That is exactly what the 1AC did, but the 1NC did not do this as per the conditional ethics argument, which Nathan specifically flagged. The 1A is the reason their cafe alternative could not solve because they are not a legitimate approach to our ethics or any form of ethics. Our intro evidence is that ethics need to be extended unconditionally. They are not really ethics at all. They are just a contingency, which means that only the affirmed resolute stance is able to access the out-of-round pedagogical impact or any impact anywhere. Now the state isn't flow. You cannot win a cabinet when you are conceding that the power is fluid. Their evidence might be pretty good, but it all presupposes a structuralist approach. Power is fluid. That is a burnout reference. This argument is conceded the left, which means that these new two and our extrapolation should be rejected. The state does not exist. No single institution can dominate other discourse. Power is channeled through certain institutions, but the solution is not to destroy the institution. The impact is our Newman and Deleuze evidence. Resistance just gives you means for power to exert itself. When you push and over the door pushes back rather than destroying the institutions of so-called oppression, i.e. the state. Or capitalism, you have to work through them. The complete destruction of the institution lets the power free. Or without capitalism, a structure which first challenges the frames, which objects can become devalued means of the discourse of consumption, and it shall simply recalcify and become more oppressive. Their imagining of a world without capitalism is unable to solve anything because the utopian imagination fails to account for recalcifying forms of power into new oppressive regimes. Their arguments about specificity do not make any sense because this is an overarching question of the way that power operates, that we cannot be cooperative because the state is a collection of individuals. We are individuals, which means that we can change the state on an individual level through approaches. This means it takes on 100% of their cooperational links, but I'll answer these links specifically just to be safe. Their state is based morality link does not make any sense. The context of the way that Nathan explained the framework, but everything is already a question of politics and ethics. Even they rely on a decision to choose, but our ethics is an individual choice. Not as for the framework debate, which means that we don't link to this argument. They say that the state would co-opt that was answered, but they'll also be answered on the capital with renounced evidence, but they.
We don't do the disembodied arguments because we have an ethical strategy.
We don't link their disembodied arguments because we have an ethical strategy too. The one is obviously the value of life impacts don't matter because they can see the piece of love and national ethics. We owe ourselves to otherness before we owe ourselves to ourselves, which means that we should privilege opening ourselves to otherness before we privilege giving value to our own life. Now the cap debate. Plus their capital evidence flows affirmative. It says that structures are not the problem, but individuals, which just proves all the power of fluid arguments. Why our individual protest or individual stance against oppression is able to answer this. Not the cap debate. The first argument they extend is a postmodernism link, which doesn't really make any sense. They say that we don't take a stance on technology or on science. The reason is because those are fluid. This was explicitly in one era. Technology can be used for good things like starting a revolution over the internet or using the weapons of power to fight against power in revolutionary struggle against capitalism. Science can be used against even Marx relied on a consumption of a science, which means that the only thing that we can necessarily deem as always already bad ontologically is things like oppression. This is our insurance evidence. Anyway, call for this in the context of our. Call for insurance evidence in the context around. We are an ethic of openness, all of this, which means we necessarily outweigh the impact of the cap debate because we reject the violence of capitalism, which, since Brendan is describing the alternative in just an abstract sense, we are the alternative. We reject the oppression of capitalism. We also reject the structures to it, even if capitalism is the mode through which other forms of oppression are valued. This is not necessarily true as for the way Nathan explained it. There are things like ageism and sexism that are not necessarily outside of capitalism, at least to some extent, which means that there's only risk that we have an external impact on the permutation. We necessarily solve all their arguments because it's not a question of the material they are conceding this permutation would be able to solve option because they conceded most of our Renato evidence. It's not new. It's logical extrapolation of all the arguments I make on the capital and the 1AR and on the powers fluid, but the cyborg is fluid. It's changing. It's constantly changing and shifting. Which means it won't be co-opted. The evidence actually makes the conclusion at the end. And the alternative that doesn't rely on the cyborg is just as likely to be co-opted, which means there's no unique net benefit to voting negative. Anything else?
No, it's best guy.
Oh no.
What happened?
Someone kicked it over at some point, probably.
Oh, we knew that, right?
Oh, we have a
It's not on the computer, right?
Hold on.
Oh my God, on their evidence. There's hand dryers in the bathroom.
Yeah.
This is, oh my God. When the next round starts. They're paper and they're all wet.
Alright, I'll get it. We dry it off and it'll dry quick. It really will.
Well, hopefully it maintains to be a problem.
Right.
And hopefully it's not going to be moved.
Right, that's right.
I might not be able to get it to that, but I'd like it to be a big issue.
just trying to close something on it. Outside?
No, underneath, like we're trying to catch strings.
Okay. We should watch out for this. I forget that one.
I don't think it's
What? One, you got I was just oh, okay. Would you text him real quick?
I got my phone calls from talking to her. The other night, we were
Yeah.
always.
Not so bad.
It's not good. Where's Noah? I'm always asking where's Noah. When we were leaving for the ToC, I was like, we're at his house. He kept calling us earlier to pick up. I know, it's married. I opened his door and I just see him just like covered in water. He just got out the shower, putting clothes on. He's like seizing his head. He's like, we're coming out.
This kid in Manila lived next door to me.
No, I know. You guys were roommates?
Yeah.
How could you stand him?
It was like literally looking into his room. It was just like he just emptied all of his stuff on the floor.
There was a massive bed copy. One side of the room was like guys together, everything was folded up, like put in drawers, and then there was just a shit store.
Mine like would never forget it. He doesn't use a towel when he takes a shower. It's on the bathroom floor. It's just covered in dirt.
I don't think that's true.
Dude, is that a German like eagle on your plate or state?
It's not. No, I hope not.
No, that's one of the entertainment camps.
It's like some public thing.
Yeah, I'm all in. It's like a Nazi eagle.
Sounds like it.
Congratulations to both teams. It was a good debate. The winner on a 3-0 decision is the app. Decision should be limited down to the ethical component of the app versus the neg. And there's not an ethical theory on either side at any point in the debate about why or how consequences of the app project should be evaluated in an initial ethical encounter with the other and sort of facing the others. So the general framework of their stuff, I think, is something that your capitalism business doesn't really respond to. You haven't heard about it. We can talk about it in a second, for sure. But I think that the arguments like the end goal of the anti-cracks coalition is where it ignores people who have other reasons and stuff like that. It probably doesn't really the initial action of the app is unethical. That it doesn't turn out quite the way that they want it to. You definitely win that it doesn't turn out quite the way that they want it to. But I think that they win that if the debate is about that initial contact, then the decision for the judge is about which of those two approaches is more ethical. The thing that was difficult about this is that a lot of the arguments on both sides about why the approach of the other one isn't ethical sort of rely on the consequences of that, either implicitly or explicitly. They're about like what it would take to do to have a particular encounter with another, like whether it's the side work, whether it's full of charity, the idea of capitalism or whatever. But at the end, you're also like imagine utopia more or less, and they win if you get to do that. But I think that they win that imagination isn't ethical because it doesn't condition the human versus the other self versus the switch places, that it includes an element of structure. There's sort of like structural blame argument that means that the interpretation is mediated in a way that the app is not. And a lot of other stuff, I think that a lot of the other stuff, like the app probably kills everybody, clearly. But I think that the app wins it all. That's everything. Materiality is fucked up and nothing's wrong anyway. It's only really about whether this one decision is ethical or not. I don't think that your case establishes that the app is not. I think that a very small argument about what the alternative is not. Mediation by structure is the extrapolation of the Kepler evidence as well as the sort of like power of the structure. By the way, I thought, so I studied this academically and thought this debate was very well done on both sides. It was like one of the best K debates I've seen in a long time, either in high school or college. In fairness, I don't judge the framework debates, but very well. I agree with Calum that the only thing that ultimately matters is the ethics question. The 2NR kind of reference to why your extinction impacts might matter is a little bit sloppy. That happens on the CAP debate instead of on the case debate where the rest of that is occurring. I think that the AF wins the Clark argument that because of inevitable extinction and finitude that we need to instead consider the ethical component. In fact, I think that the evidence that you kind of referenced in the 2NR on this question, which was originally the Kennedy evidence on the case, I'm not even sure that this is a neg card. It seems to say that being towards extinction can never be authentic because it includes the mortal being in the world with others, which I read to be kind of like a criticism of constantly projecting towards our everything, and that means that we can't have an authentic engagement with the other. Of course, the F doesn't say that, but I think that you have ultimately uniqueness problems with when and why extinction comes first because of the kind of sloppiness on the case in the 2NR. I think that I agree with Calum substantially on the Kapler / reversibility of power question. I agree with the AF reading that that evidence, the Kapler evidence, is talking about why a focus on power, centers of power, and obscures individual responsibility. And I think that the AF's Bernauer evidence is good, that there are problems with kind of the ethical position of both of the original kind of K arguments because they define themselves by refusal of power, which allows power to maintain its hegemony. I think that another area where the 2NR was kind of sloppy that didn't, I didn't really want to address first. Once I concluded that the AF was ahead on kind of these power reversibility questions and the ethics coming first, I didn't really consider this too strongly. But the introna and conditional hospitality argument was, I thought, another area of a little bit of sloppiness by the neg, which is perhaps another ethics to add to your advocacy. I think that another thing that y'all should be doing on the AF is extracting a little bit more out of this really long book of an introna card and explaining why it is that their approach is essentially one that can't recognize otherness as otherness because it's always incorporating people into the tyranny of the same by assuming universality of class antagonism, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that dovetails with a lot of the arguments that you had going on earlier, like et cetera, et cetera. So I think that one of the reasons why the AF arguments at the end of the day in a debate that is a little bit sloppy by both the last two rebuttalists ultimately are persuasive to me is that there's a little bit more consistency there across those arguments.
I guess I have maybe two things to add. One is I thought that the framework conditionality argument is not a very persuasive argument, but was very well articulated in the IR. And kind of my gut reaction going into the 2AR was that if this 2AR started with that argument, it would put you in a very difficult place to actually convince me that the alternative access to their ethics arguments. The way, if you ever encounter this in the future, at least with me, I think you need to say that the question of like decision rests on the judge, so it's the judge unconditionally accepting the neg's ethic or the AF's ethic, and the neg's performance of that is like totally irrelevant to the judge's decision, I think is a fairly persuasive answer to that. But I thought you had to say something to that, and I thought that you did debate this debate very, very well and kind of all speeches, I thought, but I did think that that was a mistake that ended up being very costly. Number two is, while I do think that the AF is ahead on the powers fluid and characterization of Kapler, I think they're soundly winning that argument. I kind of thought that your evidence on the whole was a little bit better, not Kapler, but all of the other evidence that you extended into the 2NR. The problem for me is just that there isn't a lot of comparison between that evidence and the power is fluid argument. There's only just an extension of like, well, always go to the state that's bad type arguments without accounting for the power is fluid characterization. And I thought, while the 2NR was good on capitalism, I just thought that if you had extended the other critique and answered this framework conditionality argument better, I thought you would have been in a very good position, just because I think the alternative to the other critique resolves all of the AF's offense. Like I don't know how I could have voted AF in a world in which you won that alternative. You know, it would have required quite a bit of comparison between the 1AR arguments and Major evidence. I mean, I do think that the 1AR was actually very good on the colorless fluid argument, but you know, so it was not necessarily an easier 2NR to give, but I did think, kind of after reading your evidence, that there is still possibly a risk that starting with the state was bad. There's certainly no offensive argument about why you should start with the state. You know, absent theory questions, I thought you would have been in a fairly good place.
So do you think we should have gone only for the state stuff in the 2NR, or gone for all the state as the alternative to capitalism, because both of them rejects the current dominant structure?
If you go for both, you have a harder 2NR. I'm not saying that you can't go for both, but I thought at least I could see myself voting nay on just the state stuff. You know, even though I do think the affirmative is fully winning that argument, I just think the existence of the alternative changes the context of how I would evaluate the argument dramatically.
As the pedagogy add-on, is that just a waste of time in the 2NR 1AR, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
That needs to be more explicitly foreshadowed.
Okay.
Especially whether what you've done is good or bad, so nobody relies on us evaluating all this other stuff. You either win or lose based on that. This is basically it.
Do you think that'd be a better argument against the regard for a policy strategy as opposed to a critical strategy? Just like the pedagogical stroke of the 1AC as opposed to the actual plan text?
You have a card for it. The card that you read here is not so much a card.
Is that second card not good enough for the Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Good luck, you guys. Thank you.
Sorry, can I find out
The bad part is we got to stay here longer now.
Yeah, that's why I gave you the...
Have to choke.
Right. So we're going down there.